Okay, hi guys. This is our brain dissection, and first I wanted to show you the model of it and talk about some of the parts that we're going to look at in a real sheep brain. Okay, so the first thing is your cerebrum is this part, the large part of the brain, and the cerebrum, in the back of it, you have a cerebellum. The cerebellum is sometimes called the hindbrain, low and in the back. And part of the cerebellum, you can see that white nerves, those would be myelinated nerves in there. They call that the arbor vitae, or tree of life. And so the arbor vitae is in the cerebellum. And then the cerebrum, when we dissect it in half, the first thing that you're going to see is the sheet of connective tissue that holds the two hemispheres together. That's called the corpus callosum. And then in the corpus callosum, you have actually would be your thalamus gland, and your hypothalamus is right here. And at the base of the brain, that's attached to the base of the brain, is your pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland, of course, for growth and development, but that's in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. Remember the bone that's most interior in the skull? So your pituitary gland. And then if you look right in between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, right in here is your pineal gland. And your pineal gland secretes melatonin, and that regulates your circadian rhythm or your sleep-wake cycle. And let's see, the other part of the brain that I want you to be comfortable with is in the center of the brain. First off, your spinal cord comes up, and when it's in the brain, it's your brain stem. Your brain stem is made of three different parts. The top is the midbrain, the first bump is the pons, and the second bump is the medulla oblongata. And I think of them as switching stations when they're sending impulses where they need to be analyzed in the brain. And of course sending the effectors, nerves back down to respond. The other part that Freire didn't talk about was the tough outer coating of the brain is called the meninges. And the meninges is actually made of three different layers. And we'll go from the innermost to the outer. The innermost layer that attaches right to the brain is the pia mater. And then in the next one out from the pia mater would be the arachnoid mater. And the arachnoid mater, of course, is the vessels and nerves, and so it looks like a spider web, so that's why they call it the arachnoid mater. And then the outer layer of the meninges is called the dura mater. And dura mater comes from tough mother in the Greek language, so that's where that comes from. So the meninges, again, is the three layers. And cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF, that's located between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater. So you think subarachnoid for where the cerebrospinal fluid is located. And that fluid, of course, is for protection and buoyancy of the brain, etc. Okay, and I guess if that's all the parts on the brain that we'll look at, then we're going to dissect a brain. And so let me bring in the brain right there. Okay. Okay, this is your brain. This is your brain on drug. No, I'm kidding. Okay. So if we look at the brain, and here again, the large part of the brain is the cerebrum, and the hindbrain, or the little part, is the cerebellum, and the meninges, that three-layer meninges, you can't really see it, but you can see it's kind of a membrane that wraps the whole brain and the spinal cord also. And so first the outer coating is the meninges. But then if we look at the base of the brain, some of the parts that I would like you to take note of, the nerves. And of course this would be your spinal cord comes up, your brain stem again, and then it comes up to different nerves. So these highest ones out here, or the ones that are the longest, they are your olfactory nerves. They go all the way out to your nose. So those would be your olfactory nerves. Right behind here, and this is usually a U, and I don't know why, but they're the optic nerves to the eye, and they always cut them off. And I don't know if you can see, but this one's cut off right there, and that one's cut off right there. So the optic nerves, and one goes out to this eye, and one goes out to that eye. There's a U shape in between the optic nerves called the optic chiasm. And of course we already know that a lot of what you see with one eye, a lot of it's processed on the other hemisphere of the brain. And so that's why that optic chiasm is kind of important. And then if we come back a little bit here, you have trigeminal nerves, you have your facial nerve, and you don't have to worry about nerves in here for now, but this is where a lot of the nerves on the base of the brain. Okay, so then if we go back to the cerebrum and the cerebellum, the next part that I'd like you to see is if we separate the cerebrum from the cerebellum, and you can see I pulled that membrane apart, there's that tiny little structure in there, and I like to call that the hiney butt because it looks like a hiney butt. And if you see the cheeks of the hiney butt here, if you look right up in the crack of the hiney butt, there's a little gland, and that's where the pineal gland is, the one that regulates your circadian rhythm or your sleep-wake cycle. So that would be your pineal gland. Okay, now we're going to dissect the brain right in half. And of course we don't ever want to saw with a scalpel, so we try to dissect it right in half without cutting myself. Okay, so we have the brain dissected, and the parts that I'd like you to see. First off, again, this was the cerebrum, the large part of the brain. The little brain or hindbrain is the cerebellum, and in that cerebellum you can see the arbor vitae, or tree of life. And here again would be the brain stem made of the top part, the midbrain. The first bump is the pons, and the next bump is the medulla oblongata. And of course, when the brainstem comes out of the skull, it becomes the spinal cord. Okay, and the next part we talked about, it looks like kind of a C shape right here, this white tissue. That's the corpus callosum, and that's what actually attaches the two hemispheres of the cerebrum together. And you can't really see, but anyway, in here would also be your thalamus gland, and your hypothalamus would be down below. Your pituitary would be down here, but you really can't see a lot of that gland. The other things I wanted to mention are the folds of the brain. So all of these folds here, those are called the gyrus. Okay, so gyri for singular, gyrus for all the folds of the brain. The grooves in between are the sulcus or sulci. And of course the folds of the brain, it's all wrapped, so you have more surface area for processing information. And in here, if you see the sulci or the grooves in between, and the gyrus are the folds of the brain. So those are parts I'd like you to be comfortable with. And we'll just look at the other half just to see if we can see anything better. Yeah, not really. The corpus callosum is still kind of in shape. But anyway, you can still see your brainstem, your, again, cerebrum, cerebellum with the arbor vitae. And that's pretty much it for the dissection of the brain. Hope that was helpful.